Hi everyone, my name is Aaron and welcome back to my channel. I want to give a short description of how Scientology tries to influence elections, particularly here in Clearwater, Florida, where I live. Now, the emphasis here really is on how they attempt to influence elections, because the fact is, regular viewers of this channel will know, Scientology doesn't even have enough members to be able to actually influence an election, but it doesn't keep them from trying. And I want to explain to you how they do that, because, recommending candidates or talking about politics, recommending that members vote for a particular candidate is something churches are prohibited from doing. Any organization that's recognized as a church or has tax exemption on the basis of being a church, strictly prohibited from delving into politics in that way and telling their members who to vote for. So Scientology's figured out a cute way to get around this. And the main players in how they do this are these superstars right here. Superstar. You have Brett Miller and Joanie Sigal and Steve Sigal, who are local Scientologists. These three individuals created a Scientology front group called Citizens for Social Reform. Mike Rinder wrote a post on his blog all about these guys and their organization, explaining how the individuals and the organization itself is really just a front and a mouthpiece for the Church of Scientology and its Office of Special Affairs. So these guys reach out to anyone running for elected office in Clearwater and also the county, Pinellas County. And they sort of trick these candidates into interviewing with them under the guise, the organization operates under the guise of its main focus, its main priority is how dedicated a candidate is to religious liberty and religious freedom. And, religious liberty and religious freedom sounds like a worthwhile goal to anybody running for office here in Florida. And so candidates are tricked into interviewing with these guys to basically lay out their credentials on the subject of religious liberty. Now, to show you exactly how they do this, I'm going to read for you some excerpts of the interviews they did with these candidates about a year and a half ago for the last city council elections. And I'm going to show you how they give the recommendations and what it actually means. Now, this is a very timely discussion because, as the regular viewers of this channel already know, not only do I run the Aftermath Foundation, which helps people who are escaping from the Sea organization and escaping from Scientology, but I am also now running for Clearwater City Council myself. And for anybody who would like to support that campaign, you can go to this website right here and help me get the word out. Any assistance you can help me getting donations to the campaign, hugely appreciated. By the way, you're not going to believe this, but we got some secret closed-circuit TV footage of David Miscavige eating in a Scientology restaurant upon hearing news that I had officially filed the papers to start my campaign. Take a look at this. Oh my God, I hope he's okay. Thank you to our tipster that sent us that footage. All right, as I was saying, but the fact that I am running brings into the spotlight the role of Brett and Joanie and Steve and their bogus Scientology front group claiming to care about religious freedom. So let's look at how they go about this. So back in February 2020, this was 1 month before the last city council elections occurred, Citizens for Social Reform put out a press release and they sent it to floridapolitics.com. So it says here, a group of Clearwater Scientologists has released recommendations for the Clearwater mayor races and the city council races. The group based its recommendations almost solely on candidates' commitments to First Amendment protections. So you see here, that's what the organization says it cares about. First Amendment protections, when it's said by the citizens of social reform, is a euphemism for not critical of Scientology. It also means not in any way supportive of others who are publicly critical of Scientology. So when this organization is trying to figure out who to endorse, and by the way, in this case, endorse means who to tell all of the Scientologists to vote for. The two things they have to keep in mind is, one, how friendly or unfriendly is this candidate to Scientology? And two, what chance does this candidate already have of winning? Because in addition to this group existing to tell Scientologists who to vote for, there's another Scientology agenda item that Citizens for Social Reform has to keep in mind. Citizens for Social Reform has to be careful not to expose the fact that Scientology has for decades been massively, exponentially exaggerating how many Scientologists there are. They exponentially exaggerate how many Scientologists there are in the world, but especially in Clearwater. Scientology claims there's 15,000 Scientologists living in Clearwater Incorporated. In other words, potentially eligible to vote. The actual number of Scientologists living in Clearwater is closer to 2,000. and that includes maybe 2,500. And that includes a vast majority of that number are the Sea Org members, who are foreign nationals here on religious visas. They're not citizens, they're not registered to vote, they're not able to vote. The true number of how many Scientologists are registered to vote in Clearwater is much closer to 500 or 600. And I'll do another video showing the math on that, but it is absolutely true. And so Citizens for Social Reform has to be a little careful not to expose this lie, this exaggeration. So sometimes they will endorse a candidate just because they know that candidate is guaranteed to win, and they don't want to look like they always pick losers. Sometimes the fact that a candidate is guaranteed to win and is not an outright avowed enemy of the church is enough to make them safe to endorse. So this goes on. Scientologists Brett Miller and Joanie and Steve Sigal recommended Frank Hibbard for mayor. Hibbard previously served as mayor from 2005 until 2012, leaving office because of term limits, but the group offered some reservation. We make this recommendation with some reservation, however, because of Mr. Hibbard's choice of campaign consultant, who has used slanted promotional materials and misleading surveys to encourage anti-First Amendment divisions in the city. Anti-First Amendment divisions within the city is code for Frank Hibbard's campaign consultants put out a survey that was very high, that in its questions evoked highly critical responses from citizens on the subject of Scientology. This survey is something Frank Hibbard spoke about a lot while he was campaigning for this election, because the question of Scientology always comes up in these elections. And Frank made it a point of acknowledging that he sent out this giant survey to Clearwater voters, and that the number one question that got the most feedback in terms of volume and also in terms of emotion and anger and upset was the questions about Scientology. So Scientology's complaining that Hibbard's campaign consultants sort of aided and abetted this anti-Scientology sentiment in the city, but they're endorsing him anyway. And I'm telling you, the reason is because Frank Hibbard was never going to lose this election. And knowing that he was going to win, they at least wanted to be able to say after the fact, well, we did endorse you. We were on your side. We were pulling for you. That's how these guys work. It says here that the trio of Scientologists didn't give any thoughts about City Council member Bill Jonson. The group also rejected small business owner Morton Meyers, who said was not adequately prepared. Now this one's interesting. By the way, Bill Jonson was running for mayor against Frank. Morton Meyers was running for mayor against Frank. Morton Meyers is the son of a Scientologist and a Sea Org member. You would think that he would be a shoo-in for the endorsement from this organization. The fact that they didn't speaks to a very interesting point here. Morton Meyers, his father is not only a Scientologist, but a Sea Org member. But Morton is not a Scientologist. And when he was running the Tampa Bay Times, published this familial connection that he has to Scientology and, even further to the Sea organization. And that certainly hurt Morton. But I do know Morton Meyers. And Morton Meyers is 100% not a Scientologist. In fact, Morton was kind of raised in Scientology, but is no longer a Scientologist. That makes Morton, in the eyes of Scientology, kind of a bad guy. And that's why he didn't get the endorsement. It's not good enough that your father is a Sea Org member. In fact, the fact that your father is a Sea Org member and you're not a Scientologist, that's a strike against you. So Morton was never going to get the endorsement of the Scientologists. And I don't even think that he wanted the endorsement. But the fact that it was published in the newspaper that his father was a Sea Org member definitely worked against him. Also, Morton had no chance of winning. Frank Hibbard raised $155,000. Morton raised like $4,000, and everyone else raised tens and tens of thousands of dollars. So, like I said, this Scientology group does not like endorsing people it already knows is going to lose because it looks like they have no influence or power. There was another person running for mayor named Elizabeth Drayer. She sort of branded herself Elizabeth Sea Turtle Drayer. The Scientology group offered little reason for rejecting her campaign other than to poke fun at her environmental advocacy. Well, if there's anything Scientologists care less about, it's the environment. I mean, come on now. All right, moving on. As many of you guys know, in the last city council race, well-known Scientology critic Mark Bunker was running for city council. This put Scientology in a very awkward position. They had to absolutely pick someone to endorse against Mark, but it had to be someone willing to receive that kiss of death of Scientology's endorsement. And not only receive the endorsement, but to like take Scientology's ball and run with it in terms of the black propaganda, hateful smear tactics that Scientology runs against Mark Bunker. Scientology managed to find that exact candidate in Eliseo Santana Jr. for the Seat 2 City Council race. Eliseo is a very strange character who seems to have nothing better to do but for run for any seat he can find. He ran a losing bid for a school board seat. He ran a losing bid for the city council seat. He then ran a losing bid for the sheriff's position against our sheriff, who happens to be like one of the most popular sheriffs in the entire country, Bob Gualtieri. But for the city council race, he was Scientology's boy. So the organization, this Scientology front group, says they're recommending Eliseo Santana Jr. The group said it was a close call between Santana and Bruce Rector. But in the end, it believed Santana had better chops to aggressively defend constitutional liberties. Now, prior to this election and all this going down a couple years ago, most people did not actually understand that Brett and Joanie and Steve existed to be a proxy for the Church of Scientology. These guys had managed to pull off the con that they were somehow, a conduit to the religious community, as opposed to just being a conduit to maybe like 600 Scientology voters. So I'm glad they went with Eliseo instead of Bruce Rector. Bruce Rector is actually a friend of mine, and he is no friend to Scientology. And if Scientology had endorsed him, I'd have to really bust his balls on that until the end of time. But they didn't endorse Bruce. They endorsed Eliseo. And the fact that they did endorse Eliseo, and the fact that all Scientologists were instructed to vote for Eliseo, any Scientologist who voted for Eliseo, gave us an opportunity we'd never had before, which was to an actual case study in how many voting Scientologists there are in Clearwater. And Eliseo, out of 5 people running for the seat, Eliseo came in 4th. Unfortunately, Bruce came in 5th. But Bruce came in 5th with 2,725 votes. Eliseo came in 4th place with 3,226 votes. Now, although all Scientologists voted for Eliseo, it would not be fair or accurate to say that the only votes Eliseo got were from Scientologists. Eliseo had a lot of support from Democrats. He had a lot of support from some veteran and police communities, because he used to be with the police. And he had some support, probably a decent amount of support in the Latino community. So to be fair to Eliseo, if we work with the assumption that he probably got as many non-Scientologist votes as Bruce Rector, then that, looking at it that way, shows only 500 Scientologists voted in the election. There's 2 other ways you could also estimate how many Scientologists voted. And I covered this in another video, so I don't want to cover it right now for the sake of time. 3 different ways you can try to estimate how many Scientologists voted. Each way arrives at an answer of somewhere between 500 and 600 votes. Can you imagine if politicians in the city, county, state, but particularly at the federal level, in the House and in the Senate, could you imagine how much courage we would probably start to see on behalf of these politicians if they understood that in a tiny little city like Clearwater, where Scientology acts like it's a huge fish in a little pond, they can only get 600 voters to the polls? Do you agree with me that one of the reasons we see politicians and bureaucrats in the Department of Justice and whatnot acting like they're afraid of Scientology? Do you agree with me that it's partially because they think Scientology is so much bigger than it really is? That they think Scientology controls some huge voting bloc? Do you agree with me that if politicians and some key bureaucrats truly understood how small Scientology was, that we might see a change in behavior? We might see a change in how willing Congress is to demand that the IRS review and revoke Scientology's tax-exempt status? Because that's what I think. And I'm wondering if you guys agree with me. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you see a correlation between these things? Is raising awareness about how small Scientology really is, would you expect that to be correlated to the willingness on behalf of Congress to demand Scientology's tax exemption be revoked? Or am I being too optimistic? Let me know down below. All right, just a little more about this. So there was one other city council seat up for grabs a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And that was seat 3. And Kathleen Beckman was the leading candidate for that seat. She was very well known in the community, even though she hadn't lived here for that long. But the 2 or 3 years that she'd lived here, she basically spent just working full-time in the community, meeting people, working with community groups. She was well known, broadly supported. And she was running against the incumbent, Dr. Bob Cundiff. Okay, so this organization, it says, the members praised Beckman for her responses in candidate questions in both the Tampa Bay Times and in community forums, in which she correctly differentiated between individual citizens who were members of the Church of Scientology and the church itself. Well, what happened here is, since Kathleen was so new to the area, relatively, and she was woefully ignorant and uneducated on the subject of Scientology, she, when she showed up for these interviews with Brett and Joanie and Steve, and when she answered these questions about the church, she was so soft and weak. The church loves that. The church just ate that up. And you know, this rhetoric that, you have to separate the Scientologists from the church itself, why? The church is the Scientologists. It's the money from the Scientologists that enables the Church of Scientology and its activities, particularly here in Clearwater. So, the church just ate that up. They loved her. And then, but they also said, while the group's primary recommendation went to Beckman, it also wrote that Cundiff would likely continue to do a good job representing the entire community. Now, Dr. Bob Cundiff is a good guy. However, in the community, Dr. Bob Cundiff was broadly suspected to either be a Scientologist or be highly sympathetic to them. It was broadly rumored, and I say rumored only because it's what people say, it's what people said when you spoke to them, that his roommate was even a Scientologist. Now, I don't know that that's true. I don't particularly even believe that it's true. It might just be one of those things that people say. But I'm mentioning all that because you might wonder what this Scientology front group means when he says, a good job representing the entire community. Again, that's just code for not criticizing Scientology. Scientology will call anyone who doesn't criticize them an advocate for religious liberty and First Amendment rights. And yet I would like to say right here in Dr. Bob Cundiff's defense that during this campaign where he was running against Kathleen Beckman, Dr. Bob Cundiff asked to meet with me. We met at a local place and specifically asked me if I would endorse him. That takes giant, massive balls because he asked me knowing who I am and what I represent. He asked me knowing that I represent the anti-Scientology vote. Like, other than the fact that it was brave of him to ask and want my endorsement, the fact is I need more bravery than that. I need someone, if I'm going to endorse someone, I need them to be brave enough to publicly say that they absolutely refuse to accept an endorsement from the Citizens for Social Reform. If a candidate will go out there and say, I know what the Citizens of Social Reform really is. I know what Brett Miller and Steve and Joanie Sigal, I know who they really are and what they really do. And not only will I refuse to accept an endorsement from them, I actually refuse to even meet with them. Someone wants to have enough balls to say something like that, that's somebody I will endorse. Well, you guys know me, I could go on forever and ever and ever, and I have other things I want to cover, but I'm trying to keep these videos short and digestible as possible. So I'm going to leave it there for right now. Now you know who these guys are and what they do. Now you know how Scientology tries to influence the elections. You also know they're not really successful doing it, but they're going to try as hard as they can. And I'll tell you what, they have never tried harder than when Mark Bunker ran a year and a half ago. And they will never try harder still now that I'm running. It's going to get very, very interesting. And again, in my race, here's where it's going to get interesting. Scientology endorsing a candidate is the kiss of death. And the only reason someone like a Frank Hibbard wins with Scientology's endorsement is because he was going to win anyway. He was always going to win. It was Scientology riding on his coattails. But my opponent doesn't have the same kind of broad-based community support that I do. My opponent, Lina Teixera, she has a very narrow specialization on the downtown sector, whereas most people who live in Clearwater are sick and tired of hearing about downtown and would like the rest of the city to get its fair share of the attention. Whereas I, on the other hand, have been on, the board of directors of my Skycrest Neighborhood Community Association for many years now, and I'm actively involved in issues that don't just involve downtown. Also, Lina is a candidate who's afraid to mention the word Scientology, and Scientology is going to be forced to endorse her. And yet I expect that endorsement to be one of the things that torpedoes her campaign. So let's see. Will Lina Teixera come out and say that she refuses to accept the endorsement of Citizens for Social Reform? I bet you she won't, because Scientologists see Lina Teixera as an ally. The Church of Scientology sees Lina Teixera as an ally. And I believe Lina is afraid to change that. So let's see what she does. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to those who watched until the very end. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here.